The European Union today announced its most severe package of economic sanctions against the Russian Federation, a move celebrated by officials in Brussels as a powerful stand for Ukrainian sovereignty, but met with widespread dread across the continent's industries and households. This new phase of economic warfare, intended to cripple Moscow's ability to finance its military operation, being seen by a growing number of economists and political analysts as a desperate gamble that risks demolishing Europe's own economic foundation. The measures are so extensive that they effectively sever the last remaining commercial and financial links between the 27-member bloc and its largest eastern neighbor, creating a level of economic isolation not seen on the continent since the deepest moments of the Cold War. The consequences of this decision began to ripple through European markets almost immediately, as energy futures soared and industrial stocks plummeted, painting a grim picture of the difficult month ahead for the people of Europe. The sanction package itself is a complex web of restrictions. It imposed a complete and total ban on the importation of any remaining Russian energy products, including natural gas delivered by pipeline, a stream of energy that some Central and Eastern European nations had fought hard to preserve. It also blacklisted several additional Russian banks, removing them from the global financial messaging system and making international transactions with any Russian entity nearly impossible. Furthermore, the European Union has moved to enact secondary sanctions, a controversial step it had long resisted. This means that non-European companies and countries that continue to do business with targeted sectors of the Russian economy could face steep penalties and be locked out of the lucrative European market. This measure is aimed squarely at nations in Asia, the Middle East, and South America that have increased their trade with Moscow since the conflict began. The package also includes a ban on the import of Russian agricultural products, including synthetic fertilizers, critical components for modern farming, alongside a prohibition on the sale of a wide range of technologies, from advanced microchips to basic industrial machinery. The immediate effect of the energy ban sent a shockwave through the continent. In Germany, the industrial heartland of Europe, leaders of the nation's largest manufacturing association issued a joint statement of alarm. They warned that without access to even the small but critical volumes of pipeline gas they had been receiving, many chemical plants, glass factories, and steel mills would face a choice between shutting down operations entirely or passing on unbearable costs to their customers. This would make German products uncompetitive on the global market. In one poignant example, a family-owned ceramics manufacturer in Bavaria, which has been in operation for over a century, announced that it would be forced to halt production for the first time since the Second World War. The owner explained that the cost of electricity and natural gas required to fire their kilns had become so high that each piece of pottery they produced would cost more in energy than it could be sold for. The story is just one of many echoing across Germany and other industrial nations within the bloc. The situation is equally dire for ordinary citizens. Governments across Europe are now scrambling to devise new subsidy programs to help families cope with skyrocketing utility bills as winter approaches. In France, consumer groups are forecasting that the average household's heating and electricity costs could double, placing immense strain on family budgets that are already stretched thin by years of inflation. The political fallout is becoming apparent as well. Protests are being planned in major cities, including Prague, Vienna, and Rome, organized by citizens who feel that their leaders in Brussels are sacrificing their well-being for a foreign policy goal that has brought them nothing but economic hardship. The promise of a swift transition to renewable energy source, a key pillar of the European Green Agenda, has not materialized fast enough to fill the massive gap left by the removal of Russian energy. The infrastructure for green hydrogen is still in its infancy, and the construction of new wind and solar farms has been hampered by supply chain disruption and local opposition, leaving the continent dangerously exposed. The agricultural sector is facing a crisis of its own. The ban on Russian fertilizers has sent farmers into a state of panic. Russia has long been one of the world's top exporters of the key ingredient for synthetic fertilizers. And without this supply, European farmers are facing shortage and astronomical price increase for what little is available on the open market. In the Netherlands, a country known for its highly efficient and productive agricultural industry, farmers have already begun to protest. They argue that they cannot possibly produce the same yield without affordable fertilizer, which will inevitably lead to lower food production and much higher price in grocery store. Tractors have been used to block roads and distribution centers, a visible sign of the deep anger and frustration brewing in Europe's rural communities. Food security, once a given in Europe, is now a subject of anxious debate. Politicians who support the sanctions argue that this is a necessary sacrifice. But for the farmers who must till the land and the families who must buy the food, such arguments ring hollow. The reaction from the United States to the European Union's latest move has been notably cool and distant, reflecting a significant shift in transatlantic policy under the administration of President Donald Trump. While the White House maintained its position of supporting Ukraine, its approach to the conflict has prioritized American interests and a form of pragmatic realism that stands in stark contrast to the European Union's ideological fervor. Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered a carefully worded statement that avoided any direct praise for the new sanctions. He affirmed America's commitment to its European allies, but also voiced significant concerns about the potential for these measures to create severe economic instability in Europe. Secretary Rubio noted that a weakened European economy is not in the strategic interest of the United States and could inadvertently undermine the collective strength of the Western alliance. He suggested that the focus should be on providing direct military assistance to Ukraine, a path the Trump administration favors, rather than engaging in economic warfare that seems to inflict more damage on the European Union than it does on Russia. This sentiment was echoed even more forcefully by the Department of the Treasury. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent released an analysis warning that the European Union's action could trigger a deep recession across the continent. Such a recession, he explained, would have negative consequences for the global economy, including the United States. A shrinking European market means fewer customers for American goods and service. Bessent's statement highlighted the risk of capital flight from Europe as investors seek safer havens, a trend that could further destabilize European financial markets while artificially strengthening the US dollar, thereby making American export more expensive. He made it clear that while the United States government sympathized with the European Union's political objective, it cannot ignore the serious economic risk involved. The message from the Treasury was unmistakable. Europe is on its own in dealing with the economic fallout of its decision. Further underscoring the administration's position, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick commented on the impact to American businesses. He acknowledged that some American energy exporters might see short-term benefit from Europe's desperate search for alternative suppliers. However, he cautioned that the overall effect of a European economic collapse would be overwhelmingly negative for American commercial interests. He pointed out that many major American corporations have deep supply chains and large customer bases in Europe, all of which are now at risk. The administration's perspective is that the European Union has chosen a path of economic self-harm, and while the United States will watch with concern, it will not be entangled in the consequences or provide a bailout for what it views as a series of poor strategic choices. This represents a fundamental departure from previous administration, which often presented a unified economic front with Europe against Russia. The current White House sees the situation through a different lens, one where the primary responsibility is to protect the American economy and taxpayers from the blowback of Europe's policies. The political fabric of the European Union itself is showing signs of tearing under the strains. The decision to impose the sanctions was not reached easily. Behind the facade of unity, the debate was reportedly bitter and divisive. Nations like Hungary and Slovakia, which remained heavily dependent on Russian energy and industrial supply chains, argued fiercely against the new measures. Although they were eventually pressured into agreeing, their leaders have since made public statements lamenting the decision and blaming Brussels for ignoring the vital national interests of small member states. In Budapest, government officials have openly questioned the wisdom of a policy that forced its citizens to endure a cold winter and its factories to close down, framing it as a case of bureaucratic overreach from a distant and unaccountable European Commission. This internal dissent is creating new fracture within the bloc. The traditional solidarity of the European Union is being tested like never before. In addition to the East-West divided, a North-South rift is re-emerging, reminiscent of the sovereign debt crisis a decade ago. Wealthier northern countries, while also feeling the pain, are better equipped to weather the economic storm. They are providing massive subsidies to their industries and citizens. In contrast, southern nations with higher levels of public debt, such as Italy and Greece, have far less financial capacity to shield their populations from the economic shock. This disparity is fueling resentment and a sense of injustice, with populist leaders in the South accusing northern states of hypocrisy and selfishness. They argue that they are being asked to bear a disproportionate burden for a policy that was largely driven by the political elites in Brussels, Berlin, and Paris. The rise of populist and nationalist political movements across the continent is perhaps the most dangerous long-term consequence of the new sanction. In France, political figures on the right are gaining unprecedented level of support by directly linking the soaring cost of living to the government's unwavering support for the European Union sanctions policy. They are successfully tapping into a deep well of public anger, arguing that the government is prioritizing the affair of a foreign country over the welfare of its own citizens. Similarly, in Germany, a powerful new opposition movement is forming, bringing together a strange coalition of industrialists, farmers, and working-class voters who all feel abandoned by the current government. They argue that Germany's economic strength is being sacrificed on the altar of a failed foreign policy, and they are calling for an immediate reversal of the sanctions and a return to pragmatic diplomacy. The very legitimacy of the European Union project is being called into question on the street of its most powerful member states. Russia, for its part, has reacted to the new sanction with a mixture of public defiance and strategic maneuvering. The Kremlin's official spokesperson dismissed the measure as an act of desperation from a declining West, claiming that Russia has already successfully reoriented its economy to the east and south. Russian state media is filled with images of President Vladimir Putin meeting with leaders from China, India, and Brazil, signing new and expanded trade agreement for the very energy, grain, and minerals that Europe has now banned. Moscow is keen to project an image of strength and resilience, arguing that the Western attempt to isolate Russia has failed. Instead, they claim it has only accelerated the creation of a new multipolar world order where the West no longer dictates the rules of global commerce. While the true extent of the damage to the Russian economy is difficult to assess from the outside, the sanctions have undoubtedly provided a powerful narrative for the Kremlin, both for its domestic audience and for its partner in the developing world who are wary of Western economic dominance. The message from Moscow is clear. Europe needs Russia more than Russia needs Europe, and the continent's decision to sever ties will be a historic mistake that it comes to regret for generations. The long-term effects of this unprecedented economic divorce are only beginning to unfold, but it is already clear that the European Union has entered a period of profound and painful transformation, with its future prosperity and unity hanging precariously in the balance. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, and so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed, and that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to So Kane Rich, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first one's on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.